You stole it, Serena. Don't pretend to be innocent." The words pierced through the air like a blade, sharp and unforgiving, as Eleanor Davenport's finger pointed accusingly at Serena. The grand estate felt suddenly smaller, as if the walls themselves had drawn in closer. Serena stood frozen, the citrus scent of wood polish still lingering on her fingertips, the bottle still clutched tightly in her hand. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind, but her mouth could only manage a trembling. I didn't take anything." The weight of the accusation was more than just the words. It was the crushing finality of it. There was no room for defense, no space for reason. The accusation had been made, and the room now turned its eyes toward her, waiting for her to explain something that could not be explained. Eleanor Monroe stood in front of her, eyes ablaze with righteous fury, her finger trembling slightly as it remained directed at Serena. "The bracelet," Eleanor spat. "The heirloom my grandmother gave me. It was in my room this morning. And you're the only one who went in there." Serena's stomach twisted with the sharp sting of disbelief. She had cleaned the estate for years, lived in their house, cared for their home, their children. She had done everything with the utmost respect. But now, in the midst of the cold marble hallway, her years of quiet service counted for nothing. "I didn't even touch your dresser," Serena protested, her voice shaky but defiant. Her hands were cold against the bottle she still held. "I dusted the windows, cleaned the bookshelves. I swear to you, I never—" "Shut up!" Eleanor's voice broke through the air like shattered glass, cutting through the fragile thread of calm that had remained. "You always act like this house belongs to you. You think we don't notice the way you move through here, as if you own it. But you're not family, you're just a maid, a thief. Serena recoiled, the words stinging far more than the shove that followed. She stumbled back, the bottle of polish slipping from her grasp and crashing onto the hardwood floor. It rolled across the room, a low sound that seemed to echo through the walls, carrying with it the weight of everything Serena had worked for, everything she had tried to build in this house. The family she had served for years, suddenly reduced to accusations. Serena's heart hammered in her chest as she pressed her shoulder against the cold wall. She could feel it now, the ache of the impact. But the pain in her shoulder paled in comparison to the storm swirling inside her, the knot in her throat, the sting of betrayal. "Get out," Eleanor commanded, her voice laced with venom, "before I call the cops." Serena blinked, her chest tightening. This was her home. This was where she had built a life. "I swear to you I didn't steal anything," she whispered, though she knew it was futile. The words felt hollow, as if there was no longer space for her to be heard. By now the sounds of the altercation had drawn the attention of the rest of the household. Sarah Monroe, elegant in a pale silk robe, hurried up the stairs, her concerned gaze falling upon the scene. Charles Monroe, tall and composed, followed closely behind, his expression unreadable. "What's going on here?" Charles demanded, his voice firm, though it was clear he had no idea what had transpired. Serena tried to speak, to explain herself, but it was as if the words stuck in her throat. Eleanor didn't wait for her to say anything, her anger only escalating. "She stole my bracelet," Eleanor cried, her voice thick with rage. "The one my grandmother gave me. It was on my dresser this morning, and now it's gone. She was the only one in my room." Serena's mind spun. This couldn't be happening. She had spent years in this house, cleaning, serving, putting up with the quiet indignities that came with the job. And now, here she was, accused of something she hadn't done. There was no room for explanation, no room for understanding. She was just a thief in their eyes. She wasn't part of the family. She never had been. "I didn't touch your dresser, Miss Eleanor. I swear to you I didn't," Serena said again, her voice breaking under the weight of the accusation. Are you serious? Sarah asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Chloe, did you leave the bracelet somewhere else? Did you put it in another spot? No, Eleanor snapped. I always leave it on the top left corner of my dresser. It was right there, and now it's gone. Serena's breath hitched. She could feel the cold sting of their gaze as they all turned to her. I didn't take anything, she repeated, her voice shaking but clear. The silence hung in the air like a fog. I didn't do it, Serena said, her voice rising with the frustration and anger that had been building inside her. Why would I steal from you? After all these years? Why would I do that now? But no one answered. No one came to her defense. No one spoke. Instead, they all stared at her, their silence weighing heavy in the air. The cook, Lisa, and the groundskeeper, Harold, arrived at the edge of the hall, their expressions unreadable. They said nothing, but their eyes followed every movement, every word exchanged between the Davenports and Serena. Eleanor's face twisted in fury. She's lying, she hissed. She probably already hid it somewhere. Don't let her leave. I'm not running, Serena said quietly, but her voice faltered. She stepped forward, trying to move past them, but Charles lifted his hand. I think it's best if you stay right here, Serena, he said, his voice low and measured, until we figure this out. Serena's hands clenched into fists at her sides, her emotions a mix of disbelief and helplessness. She had worked for them, had given everything, and now she stood accused, her dignity stripped away. The shame of being treated like this, like she wasn't even human, gnawed at her insides. You think I'd steal something and stay? Serena's voice trembled. You think I'd do that and keep cleaning your house? We just need to be sure, Sarah said gently but firmly, her voice betraying a mix of sympathy and discomfort. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Serena's breath caught in her chest. She turned slowly, feeling her heart break into 1,000 pieces as she looked around the room at the people who had once treated her like family. She had been there every day, every morning, every weekend. She had cleaned, cooked, and helped without a second thought. This was the gratitude she got. No one's accusing you, Charles began, trying to intervene. But Eleanor's voice cut him off. Yes, I am accusing her, she snapped. She's a thief, and we're going to find out where she's hidden it. Serena's heart beat loudly in her chest. She wanted to leave. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run away from it all, but she couldn't. She was trapped in a house she had helped build. But now, it felt like a prison. Please, Serena whispered, let me go. I didn't do anything. But no one listened. Check the hallway camera, Eleanor muttered bitterly. Serena froze. The hallway camera. She hadn't even known it existed. Let's see what it shows, Charles said, his tone now tense. Serena, stay here. You can't leave until we figure this out. Serena stood there, a prisoner in her own mind, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she hadn't stolen the bracelet. But how would she prove it when the house was against her, when the family she had served for so long refused to see her? Her dignity, her silence, and her service to this family meant nothing now. All she had left was the truth, and she would hold on to it no matter what. But as she sat down on the bottom step, hands clenched tightly in her lap, she whispered to herself, They never saw me, just the story they wanted to see. The silence in the room stretched out longer than Serena had ever felt before. She sat on the edge of the polished staircase, the cold wood biting into her skin as she tried to hold her composure. Each tick of the grandfather clock echoed like a reminder of the time slipping away. Her hands were still trembling, but she gripped them together, desperate not to break down. She had been here for years, cleaning, organizing, making the house run smoothly, but now it felt like she had been replaced by an accusation, a lie. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered to herself, staring down at the gleaming hardwood floors beneath her feet. She had spent years making them shine, and now it felt like everything she had worked for was being swept away with a single accusation. She had been loyal, always doing her job with quiet pride. But now it seemed like loyalty meant nothing. "Serena?" It was Tasha, her voice a soft interruption of her thoughts. She turned her head slowly, finding Tasha standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at her with a mix of sympathy and concern. Tasha had always been there, working side by side with her. The cook in the kitchen, the cleaning staff in the back halls, both of them had seen the subtle injustices that ran through the house. But it was easier to remain silent, to not stir the pot. Now, though, Tasha's eyes were full of unspoken words. "I didn't do it, Tasha," Serena said, her voice thick with emotion. She wiped at her eyes, trying to keep the tears at bay. "I didn't steal anything, but no one believes me." Tasha took a slow step forward, her expression guarded. "I know, girl. I know." She glanced over her shoulder, making sure no one else was listening before she leaned closer. "I've worked here for too long, seen too much, and I know you. You would never do something like this. But these people, they don't see you. Not like I do. Not like they should." Serena nodded, her throat tight. She wanted to tell Tasha that she was wrong, that she was just being dramatic. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had never truly been seen, not by the Davenports, not by anyone in this house. They saw a worker, a helper, a face that would always be in the background. They didn't see her as Serena Brooks, a person with thoughts and feelings, dreams, and a life outside these walls. The tension in the air grew heavier when Charles and Sarah entered the hallway. Sarah looked almost frail, her hands wringing together in front of her. Charles was still the stoic patriarch, but the weight of the situation had begun to settle in his features, making his expression unreadable. They both paused when they saw Serena sitting there, waiting for something, though none of them knew what. "Serena, can we talk?" Charles's voice was softer than it had been earlier, but there was still an undertone of authority in it. Serena stood slowly, feeling the eyes of the family on her once again. She nodded, but as she moved toward them, she felt something break inside. She had trusted these people. She had served them, and now they were treating her like a criminal. But worse than that, like she was invisible. No one had ever asked her what it felt like to be in this house, to live in its shadow. No one had ever asked if she had dreams beyond the clean walls and perfect meals. "Why do you think she'd do this?" Sarah asked quietly, a softness to her voice, but a hesitation that made it clear she didn't truly know how to believe Serena. "She's worked here for years. This doesn't make sense." Charles crossed his arms, staring at Serena as if searching for some hidden truth in her eyes. "We have to be sure, Sarah. We can't ignore the evidence. The cameras—" "Do you really think I'm the one who took it?" Serena interrupted, her voice growing more assertive. She wasn't sure where the strength was coming from, but it surged through her, an undercurrent of anger and confusion. "Do you think I would steal from you after everything I've done?" The question hung in the air. Sarah winced, but Charles only responded with a tight, controlled expression. "We don't want to believe it, Serena, but we have to be realistic." Tasha stood to the side, watching the exchange unfold. Serena's heart raced, and she had to fight the urge to turn and walk out. But instead, she stood still, her eyes never leaving Charles and Sarah, her voice steady. "I didn't steal it, and you know that." She took a deep breath. "If you want to believe that I did, then fine. I can't stop you. But don't pretend this is about a bracelet. This is about something much deeper." Charles looked away, his gaze moving towards the stairwell, lost in his thoughts. "I'll get the security footage again," he said after a pause. "We need to be sure." Serena's gaze followed him, her expression hardening. "No. You've made your decision, Charles. I don't need any more proof. You've already decided who I am, and it's not the person I've been for years." She turned toward the door, but before she could reach it, Sarah's voice stopped her. "Serena, please, just wait." Serena paused, her hand still on the doorframe. "What do you want me to do, Sarah? Sit here and beg for your trust?" She felt the weight of her words, but it didn't make them any less true. "You know me better than this, but none of you will ever see me." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, quietly, Sarah took a step toward her. "I don't know what to say, Serena, but I know you've been a part of this family, and I hate that it's come to this." Serena gave her a small, bitter smile. "You don't get to fix this now. Not after all these years. Not after you stayed silent." Without another word, Serena pushed open the door, stepping into the hallway. She didn't wait for their response. She didn't wait for permission. She just left. And for the first time in years, the house felt emptier than it ever had before. "I didn't steal it, Eleanor. You were never going to believe me," Serena whispered, staring at the camera monitor as the truth started to reveal itself. The screen flickered to life in front of her, its cold, sterile glow casting a shadow over the room. She was alone in the dimly lit study now, the noise of the rest of the household muffled behind the thick walls of the grand estate. The room had once felt like a place of comfort, a space where decisions were made, where things were taken care of. But now, in the presence of this cold, digital truth, it felt like an interrogation room. And Serena, once a member of the household, now felt more like a suspect. Charles had insisted she watch the footage, even though Serena had already made up her mind. She knew what had happened. She knew the truth, and it burned in her chest like a live coal. But there was something chilling about seeing it laid bare, something visceral about watching the moments of the morning unfold on screen, as if all the careful construction of the family's world was now exposed for everyone to see. The footage began with the familiar motion of her entering the hallway. Serena watched herself step into the frame, as she had done every other morning. She was in and out, a quiet blur among the dusting of bookshelves and cleaning of windows. She could see herself, calm, steady, the way she always was, just doing her job. But she could also feel the undercurrent of suspicion that had followed her every move in this house, and now it was playing out in real time. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the minutes as they passed in slow, suffocating motion. At 10:12 a.m., Serena entered Eleanor's room to begin her usual cleaning routine. The footage caught her wiping down a shelf and adjusting a curtain, moving fluidly, methodically, as she always did. The camera followed her every movement, and for a brief moment, Serena allowed herself to feel the sting of how familiar it was. She had worked for the Davenports for years, and she had always given them the best of herself, even when it had meant sacrificing parts of her own identity. She had put their needs above her own, and they had never seen her. By 10:29, she was gone. The footage didn't show any signs of mischief, any evidence of wrongdoing. There was nothing that could even hint at the accusation of theft. The silence in the room seemed deafening as the seconds passed. And then, at 10:45 a.m., the scene shifted. Serena's heart began to pound as she saw it unfold. There was Eleanor entering the room, not in a rush, not frantic, but calm, as if she had every right to be there. She walked straight to the dresser, where she had left the bracelet that morning. Eleanor took it into her hands, her fingers caressing it briefly, before she looked around the room. The camera caught her in a moment of hesitation. Then Eleanor slid the bracelet into the inside pocket of her gym bag. Serena's breath hitched as the camera captured Eleanor's movements in chilling clarity. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a slip-up. Eleanor had taken the bracelet herself, and then, after slipping it into her bag, had made sure to scream for help, accusing Serena. Serena's hands clenched into fists as she watched the whole scene unfold. This wasn't just about a bracelet, it was about something much more insidious. It was about power, control, and the cruelest form of manipulation. The footage paused. The room was still. Serena's breath came in shallow gasps as the gravity of the moment settled over her. Her fingers hovered above the play button. She couldn't bring herself to press it. She didn't want to see the aftermath, the confrontation, the inevitable fallout. She had seen enough. She knew what the next part of the footage would show. She knew that it would capture her facing the Davenports, knowing full well that the truth didn't matter. They had already made up their minds. The door creaked open behind her, and Serena didn't need to turn to know it was Charles. He didn't speak, not yet. But she could feel the weight of his presence in the room, heavy and suffocating. He stepped closer, his shoes clicking softly against the floor, a sound that was both an intrusion and an apology. "Serena," Charles said, his voice low, filled with something like regret, something that might have been empathy if it weren't so tempered by the knowledge of his own family's dysfunction. "We've seen the footage." Serena didn't turn around. She couldn't. She kept her eyes fixed on the screen in front of her. She had no need to look at Charles to know that his face was unreadable, his expression lost in a sea of conflict. He had to have known. He had to have seen the truth for what it was. But in this moment, Serena knew that seeing it didn't mean understanding it, and understanding didn't mean doing anything about it. "It's clear now," Charles continued, his voice strained. "It wasn't you. But you've got to understand, this was about more than just the bracelet." Serena's eyes flashed. She couldn't hold her anger back any longer. She turned to face him, her words a quiet storm. "This wasn't about the bracelet, Charles. This was about something much deeper. You've never really seen me. Not truly. You've never seen the way I've given my time, my energy, my heart to this house and this family, and now you think a camera is going to make all the lies disappear?" Charles opened his mouth, but Serena didn't wait for him to speak. She wasn't looking for his apology anymore, wasn't looking for the validation she had always craved. "You've already decided who I am. You didn't need proof. I've been invisible in this house for years, and now you're surprised when I stand up for myself?" The words hung between them. Charles said nothing, but his face softened, and for the briefest of moments, Serena saw something in him, a flicker of guilt, a fleeting recognition of what they had done to her. It was too little, too late. Serena turned away, her voice quiet but filled with a strength she hadn't known she had. "It's over, Charles. I'm done." The room felt colder now, the silence between them palpable. She couldn't do it anymore. She couldn't stay in a place that had broken her down for so long, no matter how much she had tried to give. "You think saying, 'I'm sorry' will fix this?" Serena's voice is steady, but the quiet pain behind her words cuts through the air as she stares at the wreckage of the Davenport family. The words had been spoken hours ago, but they still echoed in the empty apartment she now called home. Her breath felt shallow as she stood in front of the window, gazing out at the city. The sun had set, casting a soft golden light over the streets below, but it did nothing to ease the weight that pressed against her chest. The fresh air filtered through the open window, but it couldn't cleanse the stifling atmosphere in the small space. The house, the manor, the life she had once served, it was all behind her now, and yet it felt as though the pain of it had seeped into her bones. She had walked away, but she was still carrying the burden of what had happened. She could still hear Eleanor's voice, sharp and accusing, the weight of Charles's silent gaze on her as she turned her back on them. It hadn't been easy to leave. She had fought herself for weeks, weighed down by the guilt of walking away from the only life she had known. But now that she was free, she couldn't help but feel the sting of isolation. Serena's thoughts drifted to her brother, Malik. She hadn't heard from him all day. He had sent her a message earlier, asking if she was okay. She had ignored it, not knowing how to respond. What could she say to him? That her life had crumbled, that the family she had devoted herself to had betrayed her? The apartment was small, barely enough room to stretch her arms, let alone gather the pieces of her shattered life. She sat down at the small kitchen table and stared at her phone, scrolling through the endless messages and voicemails that had piled up over the day. Most of them were from Tasha, offering support. Others were from Sarah, asking if they could meet to talk. But it was the message from Malik that caught her attention. Malik, 7:14 p.m. Sis, are you okay? They're saying things on the news. Malik, 7:19 p.m. Did you really take it? Please tell me you didn't. The messages hit harder than she expected. Serena hadn't wanted Malik to know the details of what had happened. She hadn't wanted him to see her like this, broken, humiliated, vulnerable. She had always been the one to protect him, to guide him. But now she couldn't even protect herself. Her thumb hovered over the screen, but she couldn't bring herself to respond. How could she explain to him the deep hurt of being accused by people who had once called her family? How could she tell him about the betrayal, the years of service that had meant nothing when they needed someone to blame? She locked her phone and stood up, pacing the room. Her footsteps echoed in the small space. She was no longer the maid at Davenport Manor. She wasn't even the Serena that had walked out of that house just hours ago. She was someone new, someone who had to rebuild, and she wasn't sure how to start. The phone buzzed again. Tasha, 8:30 p.m. Serena, I know you're hurting, but I need to tell you something. They're all talking about it at the estate. Sarah wants to meet. She's been calling non-stop. Please, don't just leave it like this. Serena hesitated. She didn't want to meet Sarah. She didn't want to hear the words of apology that would no doubt be wrapped in excuses and guilt. She had already been shown who Sarah was, someone who had stood by while Serena was torn apart. But there was something else in Tasha's message. A quiet plea that hinted at more than just Sarah's regret. The reality of what had happened, what she had lost, settled in deeper. The guilt, the shame, the realization that she had given everything to people who couldn't see her. But then there was the realization, too, that she didn't need their validation. She had walked away for a reason. She grabbed her phone and typed a quick reply to Malik. Serena. I didn't steal it, Malik. I swear, I'm okay. Just a little lost. I'll explain soon. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment longer, but she deleted the last part. She wasn't okay. She wasn't sure if she ever would be. The phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Sarah. Serena stared at the screen for a moment, then slid her finger across the screen to end the call. It felt like a betrayal of sorts, hanging up on her. But Serena didn't want to hear Sarah's voice. She didn't want to listen to any more apologies or half-hearted explanations. She wasn't ready for it. A knock at the door startled her. She hadn't been expecting anyone. But when she opened it, she found Tasha standing in the hallway, her expression softer than it had been earlier. "You're here," Serena said, her voice barely a whisper. She hadn't realized how much she had needed a familiar face until now. I was worried about you, Tasha replied, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. You didn't answer your phone. I know you're upset, but you can't keep running from this. You have to face it. Serena turned away, walking back into the small living room. She couldn't look at Tasha. Not yet. I'm done with them, Tasha. I'm done with the Davenports. I'm done pretending. Tasha sighed and sat down on the couch. I know, girl, but you can't just shut it all out. You have to face it. You don't get to hide from the truth, no matter how ugly it is. Serena turned to face her, frustration bubbling in her chest. You don't get it, Tasha. They've already decided who I am, and I can't change that. No matter how hard I try, it's never enough. I've given them everything, and for what? Tasha looked at her, her eyes softening with understanding. I get it, but you can't let them steal your voice, Serena. You've been silenced for too long. You have a choice now. You can either stay invisible, or you can step into the light. The words hung in the air, and Serena felt them settle deep into her soul. She had spent years in the shadows of others, her worth measured by how much she could give. But now, for the first time, she realized that maybe the light wasn't something to be feared. Maybe it was something she deserved. She closed her eyes and exhaled, a small but powerful shift taking place inside her. Maybe you're right, she whispered. Maybe it's time. What now? Serena whispers to herself as she stands before a mirror in her small apartment, her reflection staring back at her with a quiet resolve. The faint hum of the city outside her window barely reached her ears as she stood frozen in front of the mirror, examining the woman she had become. For so long, she had been a reflection of the life she had lived, a life dictated by duty, by the expectations of the family she had served for years. But now, staring back at her was someone different, someone stronger, someone who had decided not to be defined by their past. Her apartment was modest, yet it felt like a sanctuary. It was a world away from the grandeur of the Davenport estate, where every room seemed to echo with years of tradition, expectations, and secrets. But here, in this small space, Serena had the room to breathe, to think, and to start rebuilding the pieces of herself that had been lost in the shadow of others. She ran her fingers through her hair, her reflection staring back at her with a quiet question. What now? The truth had been revealed. The accusations had been cleared, but the emotional toll lingered. The guilt, the shame, the years of being overlooked and disregarded, it wasn't something that could just vanish with a few words or an apology. It was deeper than that. And now, as the dust settled from the storm that had torn through her life, she was left with the task of figuring out who she was when the world around her had seen her as nothing more than a servant. Her phone buzzed again, the familiar vibration cutting through her thoughts. She reached for it, her thumb swiping across the screen to reveal a message from Tasha. Tasha, 8:45 p.m. You've got a call from Sarah. She's asking if you'll meet. She wants to talk. Please, don't shut her out. Serena stared at the message for a long moment, the weight of it pressing down on her chest. Part of her wanted to say no. She didn't owe Sarah anything, not after everything. But another part of her, a quieter, more reflective part, knew that closing the door on the people from her past wouldn't heal her. It would only keep her stuck in the same cycle of silence and denial she had lived in for so long. But meeting Sarah would mean confronting everything that had happened, the lies, the manipulation, and the years of loyalty given in vain. Was she ready for that? Serena stood up, her legs a little unsteady beneath her. She walked to the small window, her gaze drifting out to the city lights below, the hum of life continuing outside, oblivious to the struggle she faced. The world moved on, even when it felt like everything had changed. She didn't have the answers yet. But she knew one thing: she couldn't move forward until she faced the truth of her past, until she stopped pretending that the Davenports didn't matter, that their rejection hadn't hurt her. Taking a deep breath, she typed out a response. Serena, 8:47 p.m. I'll meet her, but not yet. I need some time. She set her phone down, walking slowly to the couch and sinking into it, her mind racing. She hadn't spoken to Sarah since the day she had left the estate. There had been a flood of messages, phone calls, and attempts to reach her, but Serena had pushed them all away. She had believed that distance would give her the space to heal, but now she wasn't sure anymore. The wounds were still there, raw and fresh, and it seemed like they would remain that way until she allowed herself to face them. The next morning, Serena woke to the sound of her phone buzzing again. It was another message from Sarah, and this time it was short, direct. Sarah, 9:30 a.m. I understand if you don't want to talk to me, but I can't let you go without saying I'm sorry. Please, let me know if you'll meet. Serena felt the weight of the message, the sincerity behind it. She knew Sarah was trying, but a part of her wasn't sure if that would be enough. How could anyone fix what had been broken? How could Sarah truly understand the hurt, the years of silence, the complicity that had festered within her family? But there was something else, something deeper within Serena. She had spent so long in the shadows, fighting to be seen, that now, when someone reached out to her with a sincere apology, she couldn't let it go unanswered. She got up, grabbed her coat, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The world seemed quieter today, less chaotic. She walked down the familiar streets, her steps measured, as though she was moving through a space that didn't quite belong to her yet. The world was waiting for her to decide who she was going to be. Serena arrived at the small cafe Sarah had suggested. The warm scent of coffee filled the air as she stepped inside, the clink of cups and soft murmurs of other patrons, a stark contrast to the heavy silence between her and Sarah. Sarah was already sitting at a corner table, her hands clasped together, her expression tense but hopeful. She looked older somehow, more worn. Her usual elegance had been replaced by a quiet vulnerability that Serena hadn't seen before. Serena sat down across from her, her eyes meeting Sarah's for the first time in what felt like forever. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence it once was. It was a space filled with possibility, with the weight of everything that had happened. I don't know where to start, Sarah said softly, her voice faltering. I was wrong, Serena, and I've spent every day since then wondering how I could have let it go that far, how I could have stood by and let you be treated like that. Serena met her gaze, her own voice quiet. You didn't stop it, Sarah. You didn't stand up for me. Sarah nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I didn't. And I can never undo that. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want you to know that I see you. I see who you are, what you've done. And I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. The words hit Serena like a wave, but they didn't bring relief, not yet. She wasn't sure what she expected, but this wasn't it. Apologies didn't change what had happened. They didn't fix the broken parts of her heart that had been shattered by the family she had trusted. You're right, Serena said, her voice steady but filled with the quiet weight of everything she had carried. You can't undo it. You can't take back the things you said, but you can change what you do next. Sarah looked at her, her face filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. And what would you have me do, Serena? Serena took a deep breath, the anger she had buried for so long starting to rise to the surface. You want to fix this? Start by telling the truth, not just to me, but to everyone. Tell them what you did. Tell them how you let me fall for the sake of your pride. And then do something about it. The words hung in the air, raw and real, as Sarah sat back in her chair, her face pale. Serena felt the power of what she had just said, felt the weight of it settle inside her chest. She wasn't going to let anyone tell her story anymore. She wasn't going to let them write her narrative. It was time to speak her truth. "They tried to erase me, but I became the headline instead," Serena says aloud, standing before a full audience at the community center, finally owning her story. The stage lights warmed her face as she stood at the podium, a quiet resolve in her posture. She was no longer the woman who cleaned the floors of the Davenport estate, whose worth had been defined by her ability to serve, to be invisible. Now, in this room, with dozens of eyes on her, she was reclaiming that power, speaking her truth with confidence and clarity. The community center buzzed with energy, a testament to the people who had come together to share their stories, to rise above the weight of their silence. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the grand stage of a television studio or a wealthy auditorium. But here, in this modest room filled with the voices of the unheard, Serena felt more seen than she ever had in the marble halls of the Monroe estate. The audience was a mixture of people, all from different walks of life, but united by a common thread. They had all been silenced, in one way or another. They had all been relegated to the background, told to remain in the shadows, their worth only recognized when it suited others. But today, that changed. Serena stood tall, the microphone before her amplifying the quiet strength in her voice. "I was never supposed to be here," she began, her words soft but firm. "Not because I wasn't capable, but because there are systems in place that decide who gets remembered and who gets erased." She paused, letting the words settle, her eyes scanning the crowd. Some faces were familiar, others not, but all of them were connected by a thread of shared experience. Serena had come to realize that she wasn't alone. Her pain wasn't unique. It was the pain of so many others who had been pushed to the edges of society, who had been forced to live in silence while others thrived. "But erasure doesn't work when we write our own names," Serena continued, "when we tell our stories. Even when our voices shake, we take back what was taken from us. This room is not mine. It's ours. It belongs to every person who was told they were too much, too loud, too poor, too black, too anything. This is the house we built from the bricks they threw." Her voice grew stronger, the rhythm of her words building with each sentence. It wasn't just her story anymore. It was theirs, too. The audience responded with nods, murmurs of agreement, and even a few tears. Serena's heart swelled, not with pride, but with a quiet sense of belonging. She had finally found her place not in a house that had never accepted her, but in a community that had always seen her for who she truly was. As she finished her speech, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't the kind of applause that signaled the end of something. It was a signal of change, a rallying cry for the voices that had been silenced for too long. Serena stood there, not for herself, but for every person who had been overlooked, for every worker who had been cast aside, for every voice that had been ignored. She stepped down from the podium, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. As she made her way to the back of the room, she was greeted by the familiar faces of those who had come to listen, who had come to hear her story. Tasha was there, smiling at her with quiet pride, while Malik stood just a little farther off, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He had always believed in her, and now, for the first time, he was seeing her as the woman she had become, not the one she had been forced to be. The room was still buzzing with energy, people coming up to thank her, to shake her hand, to tell her how her words had touched them. But as Serena moved through the crowd, she felt something different this time. This wasn't just a fleeting moment. This wasn't just a speech that would be forgotten tomorrow. She had planted a seed, and she could feel it beginning to grow, to spread. The ripple effect of her story was already beginning to touch others, and in that moment, Serena knew that the journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. As she reached the back of the room, a young woman with wide, hopeful eyes approached her, holding out a notebook. "Miss Brooks," the woman said, her voice trembling with awe, "I just wanted to thank you for what you said. I've been too scared to speak up. But after hearing you, I think I'm ready." Serena smiled at her, the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. But it was a weight she was finally ready to carry. "You've always had a voice," Serena said softly. "Sometimes it just takes someone else to show you how to use it." The woman's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, and Serena placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. She wasn't just telling her story anymore. She was helping others find their own. As the last echoes of applause faded and the room began to empty, Serena stood silently at the back of the community center, her heart still racing. The crowd had dispersed, each person now carrying a piece of her story in their hearts. It was a moment that, for a brief time, had felt like a dream. But as the world around her began to settle back into its ordinary rhythm, Serena realized the depth of what she had just done. She hadn't just told her story, she had given others the permission to tell theirs, to step out of the shadows and into the light of truth. And in that simple, transformative act, she had found not only her voice, but her place in a world that had once relegated her to the background. But even as the applause faded, the weight of what she had endured hung heavy in the air. The pain of the past, the years of being unseen, of being quietly dismissed, was still there, lingering like the scent of an old memory. It had shaped her, molded her in ways she had never realized. And even now, as she stood in the aftermath of her words, she knew that the journey was far from over. She had taken the first step, yes, but there would be more steps to come, more confrontations, more painful truths, more opportunities to either embrace forgiveness or let bitterness take root. The journey of self-discovery, of reclaiming her voice, was just beginning. For so long, she had played the part of the servant, the silent one who worked in the shadows, who gave everything without ever asking for anything in return. But now, Serena understood that her worth had never been tied to the roles she had played. It was tied to the strength within her, the quiet dignity she had always carried, even in the most degrading of circumstances. She wasn't just a maid, a worker, a nameless face in the background. She was Serena Brooks, and that was enough. Looking back at her past, Serena could see the threads that had woven the tapestry of her life. There had been moments of joy, of laughter shared with Tasha, of quiet conversations with Malik, moments when she had felt seen, if only for a fleeting second. But there had also been the years of quiet suffering, the years spent in a house that had never truly been hers, in a family that had never fully accepted her. It wasn't just about the betrayal of the bracelet, nor was it about the accusation that had shattered her reputation. It was about something much deeper, the betrayal of her humanity, the refusal to see her as anything more than a tool to be used, a presence to be ignored. In that moment, standing at the podium, Serena had broken free from all of that. She had declared herself not just for the family that had failed her, but for herself. She was no longer willing to play the role they had written for her. She would write her own story now, and she would do so with a pen dipped in truth, not shame. The lessons of forgiveness and redemption echoed in her mind as she left the stage. Forgiveness was not just about letting go of the past. It was about releasing the grip the past had on you, about not allowing old wounds to dictate the person you would become. It was about finding the strength to face those who had hurt you, to see them for what they were, and to let them go. And redemption wasn't about being absolved of your sins. It was about finding a way to walk forward, despite them, despite all that had been done to you. Family, legacy, secrets buried deep in the past. These were the themes that had driven Serena's journey, and though she knew that the road ahead would not always be easy, she understood now that her place in the world wasn't defined by her past or by anyone else's idea of who she should be. It was defined by the choices she made, the truths she spoke, and the future she chose to build. Serena knew she couldn't change the past. She couldn't undo the years spent in silence, the years spent fighting to be seen. But she could change the future. She could build a new legacy, one that was grounded in truth, in forgiveness, and in the knowledge that the story she had to tell was worth hearing. And for the first time, she was ready to face that future. As she walked through the doors of the community center, the sun setting behind her, Serena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope for herself, for the people she loved, and for the world that, though imperfect, still held the possibility for redemption. She was no longer invisible. She had become the story. And with that, Serena made her choice. She would not be defined by the past, nor would she allow it to control her. She would be the author of her own life, and her legacy would be one of strength, truth, and transformation.